This video is devoted to the TC06. It's a new camera out from CamPark. It's got a great wide angle, it's 120 degrees. Its trigger speed, I think, is 0.1 of a second. It's supposed to have 60 megapixels and 4K HD. In fact, I have the TC07 in my arsenal, and I think its specs are very similar to that. I also have the 100, 150, 180, 300, and I tried the TC09 and sent it back. But I got my hands on a TC06 and I figured I'd unpack it and also give it a bit of smackdown test. So early test was against a TC or a T300, which is a solar camera, much less on the megapixels, but 4K. So here we go. Anyway, from an unboxing perspective, usual stuff. It's a neat little camera. Um, I'm a bit more obsessed with the solar nature of cameras. So this one's a battery powered one. But again, I would say that the specs, when I've looked at them, are very similar to the TC07, which I use, and I actually find a fabulous camera. Inside the box, usual stuff, which is basically, there's 2 or 3 different ways of mounting it. There's a tree mount and then basically a strap up stuff. You've got the USB adapter and then a manual, which is actually everything's fairly self-explanatory. One important thing to note on this camera is that it's actually a bottom mount, not a back mount. So anyway, make sure you get rid of all of the little sticky pieces because quite frankly, I've left that on before by accident, and then there's a card inside. It takes AA batteries, so you'll need to load it up on that. The reason I like the solar ones, by the way, is if I've got it sitting out for a week and it's pointing at a blowing field, what I don't really want is 2,000 images of grass moving and a new set of batteries that have to be applied. So as long as you're careful of where you place it, I think the battery things turn out really well. It takes the SD cards, but I've got a bunch of micro SD cards, so what I'm going to use is an adapter for it. And generally, I use 32 gig cards or 64 gig cards, but 64 generally if I'm using both a setup of video and stills. For this setup and for the test, I figured I'd see what the still image is like to see whether it's actually a marked difference to what I currently have. So once you put the card in, you on the bottom right hand side, you basically have an on-off switch in the middle. There's a setting called setup. You put that in, and then that obviously jumps into the menu bar. You can use the menu button on the top left hand side. There's 4 icons. The top left one is sort of generic. The right hand one is things like formatting and date, etc. And then the middle two, the first one is camera options, and the second one is video options. The couple of things I do is, one is stick the date in, kind of important. Format the card, kind of important. And I also don't like the beep. It drives me absolutely bonkers. So I take the beep off. I don't use Wi-Fi and I don't use Bluetooth because the file sizes are quite big. So what I do is I just rotate micro SD cards inside the machines, and I don't actually record sound either because, wildlife-wise, when they're in the middle of the night, they don't make a huge amount of noise, to be honest. So those are set. For the purpose of this, obviously, I'm going to go with both still images and video. Then what I want to do is I want to make sure that we set it to the highest possible rates. So again, you can set it on photo and video, photo or video mode. PAR and PIR interval is I do a video and then it'll wait a certain amount of time and do another video. I set that pretty low just in case I want to do back-to-back videos. And so I think that I set it roughly around 10 seconds, so it's normalized between the two. Sensitivity is basically, what it triggers on. And obviously, you want it to be high. Well, I want it to be high because I want to catch everything I possibly can, but it depends on, again, if you've got blowy stuff in the screen, you might want to go for a low. And then from an image quality, I've set it to the highest image quality on the camera and similar both on the daytime and nighttime because there's 2 different lenses on these systems. So you basically can specify that. And from an image photography, what I've done is said, take 2 photographs, then video. And the photographs I'm actually running at the 1/30th of a second, which is the fastest rate you can do it. So basically it should trigger on everything. It'll do a couple of photographs, then it'll do on video, and then the video length I set to 15 seconds because 10's a little bit too short for wildlife, to be honest, and 30 seconds is a little bit too long. And so I find that 15 is kind of like my sweet spot. So that's it really. There's not a huge amount more that you need to set up. but hopefully all of that makes sense to you. And as I said, I'm going to give it a bit of a smackdown. So that's the camera at the bottom, which is the TC06, and then the top is T30. There's an example of 4K image video, perfectly good. I mean, in other words, contrast is really good. From an image quality, there's a still image of myself and Joe walking up with a dog, and it catching a bird. So in other words, from a speed wise, it's good. Now something interesting, if you look at the wide angle on the TC06, and then if you look at the T30, you can see it's a much narrower angle. And also if you look at the curb, it arcs. So another example is here. This one worries me a bit because on trigger speed, this is the TC06 catching a van going up. And in exactly the same location, this was the same one with the T30. It looks like the T30 actually triggered faster. So that could be a triggering issue or it could be a positioning issue, but we need to check. These images, basically, this one's a TC06, and you can see contrast-wise pretty good, and the wide angle, and then this one's basically a tighter angle with a 2-300. There is something to be said. I mean, I'm kind of looking at it and going, I don't see a marked difference, and certainly not a 30 megapixel difference. So I did look at the EXIF data, and you can see that there's definitely more megapixels across onto the TC06 than the T300. But again, somehow I prefer the one on the right-hand side, which is the T300, and I think it's probably just a setting on the sharpness, but that's something I really want to test. So that was early impressions. I think I want to give it another week as a fair shake, and I'm going to actually stack the TC06 against two cameras for a week, same location, identical directions, same settings. I'm going to do video only because that's really what I obsess about. Right-hand side is the T100. T100, I think, is a 4 megapixel, oh sorry, a 4K 30 megapixel camera. The far left-hand side is basically a T300 4K 30 megapixel camera, and then there's the TC06, which is a 4K 60 megapixel. And by the way, the cool thing about both the TC06 and the TC07 is they've actually got both the wide angle that I mentioned before, but they've both got dual lenses, meaning you actually have a dedicated lens for night and a dedicated lens for the day, and that should give you a much better quality because it's optimized for the environment. So we'll see. And I do see it on the TC07 for sure, and I fully expect to see it on the TC06. Anywho, if a gun was put against my head right now, still my go-to camera for the best quality wise is the TC07. If I had to stack up, because dollar for dollar, I think there's about $10 difference between the T300 or the T180 and the TC06, I would go with the solar and I would forfeit the megapixels, but I might be eating my words by the end of this week. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much for hanging in there and watching the video. Hopefully you found it useful. Thanks for CamPark for making such good product. Again, my golden rule is 4K, solar, and bang for the buck, and you just hit it out of the park for me. So I really appreciate that. And I'll put a link in the video description below on their website. I buy everything direct through them. Also, feel free to subscribe to the channel, have a poke around. There's a couple of years worth of weekly trail cam videos, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you put them in the comment section. Okay, bye-bye.